Welcome to the LeanBlog podcast. Visit our website at www.leanblog.org. Now, here's your host, Mark Graban.
Hi, this is Mark Graban from the LeanBlog. This is episode number 12, December 4th, 2006. We'll jump right into it today. Our guest requires really no introduction, I assume, for this audience, Jim Womack from the Lean Enterprise Institute. And after some recent trips that he took to China, we decided we would talk about the state of Lean in China, based on his observations and discussions. It'll be a two-part podcast. The second part will be released probably somewhere within the next week. You can stay tuned on the LeanBlog or subscribe to the podcast through the Apple iTunes store. One thing I will say about Jim's background, a lot of people know him maybe as Dr. Jim Womack, but they don't realize that his PhD is not in engineering or business, as a lot of us might assume. His PhD is actually in political science from MIT. Back in 1982, his dissertation was on comparative industrial policy in the U.S., Germany, and Japan, which, of course, was a perfect lead into the machine that changed the world, and the rest is history. So it's great to have him here today, and I thank you for listening. Hope you'll come back again. Our guest again today is Jim Womack from the Lean Enterprise Institute. Jim, it's a real honor to have you with us today. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Mark. I'm honored to be here.
Well, thank you. I was hoping our topic today could be the state of Lean in China, and talking about not only, is Lean progressing within China? How should people around the world competing with China view that progress, or what kind of impact does that have on our competition with China? I understand you were over in China recently, so I was wondering if you could tell us about what you're seeing firsthand and what people are talking to you about in China.
I've been going to China actually for a long time. I first went in 1984 on my honeymoon. My wife and I spent a month going all over, riding bicycles out in the country and having a generally good time. And then went back after that to go look at actual manufacturing operations. My wife made pretty clear we were not going to do any factory tours on the honeymoon. Sure. I thought it was an okay idea, but I guess it wasn't. Yeah. And then in recent years, I've been going back once a year. We have a Lean Institute in China, based in Shanghai, which, if anybody's interested, you go to www.leanchina.org, and you can find out what's going on. So, therefore, I have a reason to go. And when I go, I hate to go anywhere if I can't take a walk. Let me do some Gimba, please, and just see what's up. So that I've seen all kinds of things, which, however, do not sum up to any kind of valid database on exactly what the state of manufacture is in China. It's all, just snapshots.
Well, sure.
But what we do see, I think, is this, that the Chinese have gone from being, in some ways, sort of the world's biggest not even mass producers. That when I first started looking at Chinese factories more than 20 years ago, they were not even mass producers, just staggering, mind-boggling inefficiency, where the whole point was job generation and control, because your factory was also your home, was also the school for your kids, was also your doctor, so that the whole system was set up as a control mechanism. Yeah. And the fact that they happen to be making a few tractors, well, so much the better. Sure. So that's a tremendous transition for them to go from a centrally planned, make the party man happy stance, and by the way, create plenty of jobs, to the current stance where they are actually trying to be globally competitive in a serious way, not just a hothouse, cheap currency way, but trying to be globally competitive in a serious way, but with a tremendous long history of doing everything the wrong way, and even wronger than those orthodox mass producers around here. Sure. So it's a tremendous leap on the management side. Technology is easy. Go buy some machines. Yeah. Anybody can do that. Management's hard. So that from what I've seen, there's a real struggle to figure out what modern management, much less lean management, actually is, and how you would go about doing it. So except for the cheap wage, there really wouldn't be a whole lot that I should think people around here being outside of China, would be talking about, just in terms of fundamental manufacturing competence. But, of course, we do have the cheap wage, and so then that becomes the big issue.
Sure. So talking about making that leap from, massive waste to trying to run more like a business, I would imagine their introduction to modern management came primarily from, if you will, non-lean companies that entered China and brought management and business practices with them. Is that right?
That's right. That one channel is multinationals that come in to run things. Second channel is entrepreneurs. I went out this time to look at a pencil factory and met Andre the Pencil King, who is a foreign entrepreneur who is now the third largest maker of pencils in the world. And this guy is a lovely guy. Doesn't really know anything about manufacturing, is a financially oriented sort of fellow. And so those folks at the pencil factory are learning a fair bit about financial management, but it's not clear they're going to learn a whole lot about modern best practice actual operational management. So there are many conduits, and then, of course, the more forward-looking state enterprises and the more forward-looking entrepreneurs are out in the world looking around. They can buy the same books that we publish that anybody else can buy. They can read them and try to do something with them. So there are multiple learning paths. It is interesting that as a sort of Toyota head, that there really has not been any significant Toyota presence in China. That Toyota has a couple of joint ventures, but there has not, to this point, I think, been serious direct transmission of lean methods via the Toyota mechanism, the way we've certainly had in the States.
Yeah, at least not directly.
Right.
So when you walk the Gemba at a Chinese factory, what evidence do you see firsthand of either lean practices or lean thinking in terms of how they're running their factories or how they're managing people?
Well, again, with very isolated exceptions, not much.
Yeah.
That you can go through plant after plant with just amazing forward spending on capital equipment, just staggering amounts of machinery, in many cases doing nothing. And you say, why'd you buy all this? And the answer is, well, we've got big plans. And that's interesting, but of course most people in a rather more mature market economy don't buy capacity ahead of the market if they can help it. So that you're just kind of scratching your head looking at all of this equipment sitting there, which was bought, on what kind of a plan. But there you see it. And then you see management practices that are left over from the old era, that this was a command-control, top-down society. And then the list goes all the way back to Mandarinism, where you basically wait to be told what to do. And, of course, we know in a mature lean system, the whole idea is that people at every level initiate activity and analyze the process and, go through an A3 exercise and say, gee, what's the problem? What can we do about it? And you really don't see that, or at least I have not yet seen that. You see some very energetic, very high-level managers, but when you go out on the Gemba, you have folks who are basically standing there, asking to be told what to do. On my last trip, I saw a particularly ludicrous thing of a moving assembly line that had no product. And all the workers were at their workstations, and the line was cranking along. And about every 10 minutes, something would come down the line for some of them to work on. And, in our world, the world whoever might be listening, that we're more familiar with, most everybody would say, well, gee, if there's only something coming every 10 minutes, why don't we go somewhere and do something else, like get something to drink?
Sure.
Whereas these folks were quite earnestly standing there just in the event that something happened to come down the line. So it's look, there is a big transition here to go from a rather traditional, an utterly orthodox top-down command control management mentality to a proactive, there's a problem, let me see what I can do about it mentality. And that's going to take quite a while.
Sure. Now, you talk about that top-down command control society. I'm sure that would be very familiar to a lot of people in American manufacturing, non-lean, kind of traditional management approaches. Right. Would probably be would be very familiar going over and trying to adapt to that. But when you talk about society or the culture, as much as you can generalize, people in the United States, for example, for a long time made excuses, but that lean is something particular to the Japanese culture, and we have all of our reasons why we can't do it here, which I think a lot of people have gotten past. Do you get a sense? Are there similar excuses in China where they say, this just doesn't fit with our culture?
Well, of course, there is a long and really quite deep animosity between Japan and China. So that I find myself in the odd position of going to China to tell the Chinese that they should act like Japanese in Toyota City. And it's probably easier to hear that from me than it is to hear that from Japanese from Toyota City. And that's the way it is. I think for those Americans who might be listening in, the degree of sort of cultural division across East Asia is really quite striking. And you look at Korea, the South versus China. Let's forget about the North. Japan versus China. Vietnam versus China. There are really a lot of mental barriers to learning. And it is kind of funny how you go to the States to learn how to behave like Japanese in Toyota City, but that is to a significant extent what's actually happening. And our China Institute is run by a wonderful Chinese-American, Marcus Chow, who was at Delphi for many, many years, was the president of Delphi China, and then decided to retire and take it on. And Marcus, who is an American of Chinese origin speaking in Chinese, is giving straight lectures on exactly how Toyota would do things. And it's really quite interesting, even amusing, to be along to see this across the world and back transmission of knowledge in a way that then becomes acceptable and people can listen. So, we were on this side of the Pacific just kind of tied up in our underwear for quite a while, thinking that the Toyota thing was, quote, cultural. And by that we meant either Japanese or we meant Toyota specific. That could be either way. I mean, there's company culture and there's national culture. In my view, just a complete waste of time, and it took quite a lot of proving at Georgetown and elsewhere to show, no, wait a minute, this could be a universal way to do things, just as mass production became a universal way. That there are mass producers in China, there are mass producers in Russia, there are mass producers in America. So it's kind of amazing how much time civilization wastes on the inability to confuse the origin of something from the essence. And typically important essences are really not national cultural things, but rather more mindsets that can be learned, and that are kind of higher level mindsets that managers, what management is about is embracing some sort of philosophy of management. You have to have one. Pick one, please. And since you got a choice, well, why not pick the best? That's where we are.
Yeah, and you could hope maybe that if modern management and if that was the mass production variety of modern management hadn't taken such deep root in China. We hear already about how there's labor shortages in parts of the country, pressures pushing wages upward. If you will, the fat, dumb, and happy era maybe isn't as long as mass producers had in the United States. Does that give them more hope then to push some of those practices aside and adopt lean, or could you talk about that and what impact wage pressures might be having on Chinese companies looking at lean?
Well, look, the forward-looking folks realize that why put in place the wrong thing, particularly when you're doing new investment. And there's a pretty widespread awareness that once you get bad habits in place, it's just hard to uproot them. So that there is a generalized desire to go and immediately embrace the best management practices. But by the way, buying all of that overspecified, overcapacitized machinery is part of their view of embracing modern management practices as well. So you can end up in some pretty odd destinations with your desire to embrace best practice. But there certainly is the widespread perception that people tell you that, gosh, we could be General Motors or we could be Toyota. Guess we should be Toyota. Why build a system that is basically in retreat everywhere and put it in place in our region? So there's certainly a desire amongst the more sophisticated senior management to do the right thing. But that's very different from knowing what the right thing is or how to do it. Those are the hard parts. The earnest desire to do the right thing, well, gosh, don't most of us have that most of the time, and yet look what we do. So, look, they're no different from the rest of us in that regard, but there certainly is an intense desire to build absolutely cutting-edge, state-of-the-art businesses and not just to live off low wages. Because, look, they certainly sense that this low-wage thing is time-limited. And it's time-limited in two ways, that either the domestic economy moves in a direction where you have much higher wages, and of course they actually want that. They don't want to run a country where everybody works for peanuts and makes cheap products for Americans.
Yeah.
They would love to run a country where everybody works for wages at the American level and still manages to export goods all over the world. But to do that, you have to be very sophisticated, and you have to have some intellectual property, and you can't just be making commodities. And so they realize that this has been a sort of happy window that gave them a big leap and jump-started the whole economy. But that isn't going to last forever, and it can, come to end in two ways, that wages, particularly on the coast, really do go up. But also, in the next recession, watch out with regard to trade management. That, that the way the trading game works is that we have relatively, we have periods where we head toward more and more openness of trade that tends to happen when economies are booming. And then when economies hit the wall, the first thing politicians in every country do is listen to locals who are losing their jobs and say, oh my gosh, we've got to keep the foreigners out.
Yeah.
Well, Chinese aren't stupid. I mean, they understand a little bit about the States, but also anybody who's studied the history of trade knows that the next down cycle is the time of great risk. And I say that, by the way, myself without any particular enthusiasm. I mean, I think openness is better. But I also actually do have a PhD in political science from MIT, which I'd be happy to show you sometime, and spent a lot of my early career studying government-industry relations, including trade policy.
Okay.
So therefore, I don't think there's anybody in China who thinks naively that they can build a whole civilization based on selling cheap stuff to Americans, that at some point this train comes into the station, and then you better hope there's another train going out, because that one is probably not going to be going any further.
Yeah. It'd be interesting to see over time, and we talk about all of that excess capacity. Would they, when looking at either labor shortages or rising labor costs, would they be tempted to look towards automation as being a panacea as opposed to lean, not just from an efficiency standpoint, but from all the classic reasons of employee involvement and continuous improvement, in theory would drive them further.
Well, look, just buying kit, including buying consultants, buying machines, buying whatever, as a substitute for actually figuring out how to manage is tempting to all managers at all places at all times. That, as I say, just said in my little e-letter that I sent around recently, that managers will try anything hard that doesn't work before they'll try anything easy that doesn't work before they'll try anything hard that does. And the fact is that management's hard. Machinery is easy. You get a catalog and you buy yourself some machinery.
Right.
So that, sure, there might be some temptation as wages go up to automate. Goodness gracious, we've seen Toyota do a lot of automation over a long period of time, that they typically are not as automated as a lot of other people who are being soundly trounced by Toyota.
Right.
But the fact is that one of the rules of the world is that as labor becomes ever more expensive, you do try to work harder and harder at saying, gosh, how can we just do this with less labor, with no more capital? And then at some point, there are situations where capital makes sense. But, do I expect there to be a big boom in automation in China soon? And the answer is, well, sure, for chip making, which just in the nature of it, if you've been in a fab, well, I mean, it's totally automated. You can't see what they're working on. Don't think you or I are going to be much use with tweezers. So therefore, depending on what you're doing, there's going to be a lot of automation. I was, by the way, just in a fab in China, which was just kind of amazing that there must have been $1 billion worth of kit. As far as I could tell, no order book. And again, just scratching your head about, who thought this up.
Right.
But anyway, so therefore, look, over the long term, sure, there's going to be more automation in China. But look, we're now, and by the way, some of this is a little bit of dreaming on. People are reporting that wages are rising on the coast. Well, for the commodity stuff, you get on the bus and you go inland, okay? They've still got about 700 million people who are out there on the farm not doing a whole lot. So that I think it'd be a little bit naive to think that wages are suddenly going to rise to an American standard in a short period of time. Even in this country, there's still a wage gradient between North and South in the United States. It's been there for 200 years. So it's going to take a while before you get wage equilibrium. On the other hand, where the price is really going up, which is kind of interesting, is management. that it used to be you could go to China and hire a factory manager, teach him a little bit, and he was happy to run your factory for $5,000 a year. And now that factory manager says, well, gee, I think, don't I get $100,000 a year? Because that's what you pay as a kind of international, that's what you're paying this expat.
Right.
So therefore, it's interesting that the people you talk to, on the coast in China say that what's really zooming is manager wages. Mm-hmm. Because those folks are educated, they know how to read the paper, they've seen what the expats are getting paid,
sure.
And say, well, wait a minute, we're doing the same thing.
Yeah.
So, therefore, you don't really necessarily, as you move inland, it's sort of more problematic whether you could find cheap management. Certainly you could find cheaper labor.
Okay, and you talk about management being hard. I guess a corollary to that would be being good at management is difficult, so then therefore that would be valued, and that's part of the pull upward then on the manager wages. That if you have good ones, you want to keep them. And
absolutely, and it's true. Mm-hmm. Look, what is more precious than a good manager?
Yeah.
The last year I've been expanding my business, and I've spent a tremendous amount of time looking for good managers. Mm-hmm. It's the most important thing I do.
Yeah.
So there you have it.
We've talked a lot about cost and efficiency so far, but kind of turning our minds to quality. We talk about continuous pursuit of perfection, continuous improvement, or Kaizen. How much of that is entering, if any, the manufacturing world in China? Have you talked to anybody where they have, whether it's in terms of Kaizen events or really trying to empower employees, anyone who's made progress in that area?
Well, I think you'd have to look a long ways to find very much. Look, it's very, very early days. That there's such a leap from no factory to a factory. You go into a room full of people who previously were walking along behind a two-wheeled hand-controlled tractor, and now suddenly are factory workers. Yeah. And to jump from that to anybody want to do some Kaizen, how's about 8 Sigma anybody? This is a big, big leap.
Right.
So I think you would have to run your search party night and day for quite a while before you found much in the way of improvement activities that are actually directly engaging employees. When I was at a state-owned industry last year, look at the plant, they asked what I thought, and I said, well, here's what I saw. I saw a staggering number of people directly involved in production and producing very little, and I saw nobody at all involved in improving the process.
Right.
I didn't see a single person. I kept asking, do you have improvement teams? Where are the industrial engineers? Mm-hmm. And this plant, which was making goods for military vehicles, looked like it had been there for 40 years, and looked like nothing had changed in 40 years. Mm-hmm. Except there was just constant fiddling. None of the equipment would run, and they had the techs just kind of clambering all over it, doing breakdown maintenance.
Yeah, firefighting.
So you said, gee, this is really the state of nature I'm looking at. And that's a big, big leap from there to, everybody thinks part of their job is to improve, and you have, scheduled periodic improvement activities and so forth. That's a different world.
Yeah.
And I think you won't find too many operations at this point that are in that world.
Thanks for listening. This has been the LeanBlog podcast. For Lean news and commentary updated daily, visit www.leanblog.org. If you have any questions or comments about this podcast, email Mark at leanpodcast@gmail.com.